Welcome to the Vin Armani Show. We are streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Vin Armani. Also on Twitter and Periscope. At Vin Armani is my handle there. And of course, on the Facebook page of our content partner, Activist Post. That's facebook.com/Activist Post. So it's Monday morning, 10 a.m. Time for another edition of the show. I'm back in the States and back in the studio here in fabulous Las Vegas after spending a week last week in Acapulco at Anarchapulco. Can't wait to talk to you guys about that. We've got a great show today. Our guest is Raeford Davis, who is with Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. We're going to talk to a police officer former police officer now, retired, who has gone from believing that the police were a way to solve society's ills and has moved even further into a voluntarist position. I think this is a very important conversation for our community and for the liberty movement to have. I think that it's time that we start building some bridges and trying to help some people move toward freedom and liberty. And we do that by finding the things that unite us as opposed to the things that divide us. In terms of the things that are both uniting and dividing, we've got stories on future tech, quite a bit of that. Uber, we've got some stories about weed, of course, and some a little breakdown of some Bitcoin things. Bitcoin was a big thing at Anarchapulco. Here to help me go through all of that, as always, is my very good friend, co-host, producer, and the host of last week's show, Mr. Christian Reyes. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. A few changes to the show.
Yeah.
The way that it looks. I think it's looking pretty good.
It looks great so far.
I want to tell you thank you so much for taking over the show last week. Got a chance to watch the archive of it. You did a great job.
Thank you.
And it was excellent.
Thanks.
So thank you for doing that. I know that
fun.
I know that it's hard to both host and be responsible for all of the content and at the same time have to be working the boards and all of that, but you did a yeoman's job.
Thank you.
Yes, it was excellent. I enjoyed the show.
Awesome.
Although we did have a few technical issues at the beginning, so we didn't get a full chance to talk about Anarchapulco, but hell, I'm back, so
yeah, let's talk about it.
I'm not on a shoddy Skype connection from Mexico, which, goddamn, that was so Anarchapulco.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody needs to go. If you're in this liberty movement next year, go. First off, it's a lot of fun. Second off, you'll get to meet so many people.
Mm-hmm.
Adam Kokesh was there, spent quite a bit of time with him. Eric July and the Backwards folks were there. Roger Ver was there. Never got a chance to talk with him. He was pretty swamped.
Mm-hmm.
That guy T was there. The guys from Free Talk Live were there. Derek Bros. Lauren Southern was walking around for 2 days in booty shorts, which I think everybody in Acapulco appreciated. It was a great time, man. It was a really great time, and I learned a lot.
What was your favorite thing about it?
You know, honestly, the talks were fantastic, and you know, it's one when you go to an event and you see that things could be improved, right, but yet the event itself is excellent. Mm-hmm. You know that you're on to something.
Yeah.
Right. So next year, I know there's going to be some massive improvements, but it was really great in terms of the conference itself. The best part for me, though, was the interactions with other people who were there.
Yeah.
Right? So it was crazy. Like, I would just be sitting around and then, you know, someone would spark up a conversation and you just kind of jump in and you just join in that conversation, and everybody's so awesome. You know, that happened a couple of times at the conference with Jeffrey Tucker, where it was just like a conversation was happening. He actually ended up on my plane back too, and we got a chance to talk. That was the best part, is that you're walking around and just the minds that are walking through there.
You're in the heart of it.
And even the people who weren't speakers, there were so many people that I met, and the group of guys that I ended up hanging out with were really awesome. it's interesting, the various little contingents, you know, like you sort of have your celebritarian, the speakers who are there, right? Then you have your kind of like health and wellness, kind of a little more hippie type, you know, your vegans, your sort of little bit lefty activists, you know, but non-communist individualists, you know. Then you have your media, your different media people, the different shows that were there. But there were a lot of kind of, I guess what I would call white collar, agorists, people who were interested in things like internationalization, who were very interested in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. There was a whole day crypto polko with a lot of those guys. You got your tech guys who were there, who were interested in future tech, a lot of agricultural stuff. People who were talking about, you know, not just aquaponics, but like places where you can do farm shares internationally and when tons and tons and tons, you know, and then you had like your Libertarian Party people were there as well. Great experience. Really, really good. I would advise everyone to go next year. One of the most impressive things to me, and one of the things that stood out though, and why I'm super motivated now and super hopeful coming back, is it really felt like, okay, here's something congealing. Here are the people. This can really happen. And people there, for the most part, were interested in solutions.
Gotcha.
And, you know, my talk, I tried to focus on solutions. There were a lot of people talking about solutions, and that's a good thing. So yeah, man, I came back motivated. I think today's show goes to a lot of the stuff that was important to me when I was there, from talking about how are we going to handle this weed thing. It was interesting to see people talking about, is it decriminalization? Is it legalization? Like, how do we do this? Bitcoin, of course, huge. Future tech. There's a big, my talk was on agorism. We've got a big Uber agorism story that came out this week that is really, really cool. Before we get into all that, dude, the shirts, keep calm and avoid taxation. So, guys, sorry we had a little issue with our sign-up form on the site. Let me see if I can get this. We had a little issue with our sign-up form on the site. So if you went to vinarmani.com and you went to go sign up to win a shirt, go this week. We're going to pick a winner for this week. We couldn't pick a winner for last week. That was the women's. What do we got? This is the guys. That's like there we go.
It's one of my favorite shirts, honestly. It's
Keep calm and avoid taxation. Cool. Very, very cool. Made by Christian Rays right here in our print shop. All agorist guys, so it's for you. It's free. All you got to do is just give us your email, and we will set you up with that. So, without further ado, man, maybe we can get into some of these stories. One thing I want to say before we get into this.
Yeah.
There was some Trump stuff today. Not just today, but this last week. I think I've reached a point mentally, especially after going to Acapulco, where I no longer am going to focus, I think. Maybe this will change. But for right now, I'm feeling like it's a puppet show at this point. The State of the Union was bullshit. The Democrats, the women all wearing white and getting up and walking out, like, it's theater.
Yeah.
I'm tired of the theater. I'm tired of it. I'm over it.
Drama.
I'm ready for solutions.
Yep.
Like, the world is dramatic enough. I think most of us have enough drama in our lives without these parasites who are stealing our money to do what? To have a little reality show? It's not a reality show, man. None of them have solutions. They're fighting, they're bickering with each other. I'm not into that, so I want to talk about solutions. There's going to be a lot less Trump on this show. And especially now. I mean, we had to cover the election. We had to cover the fake news stuff. We had to cover the Russian stuff. But it's getting to a point now where it's clearly just drama. It's clearly just reality TV. None of those people have any solutions. We're going to move in a non-political way. One of the reasons, here's the thing. One of the reasons why this is very, very clear to me is because even more so being in Acapulco, and on the last day, which was called Cryptopolco, which was just about blockchain technologies and Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, technology is changing the world.
Yeah. Yep.
Big time. That's our first story, man. We have so many disruptive technologies that are hitting the road, literally, right now. Automated cars are there. Cryptocurrencies. We've got apps that are able to do such amazing things in terms of connecting us to one another. And quantum computing is going to really change the world in the next 5 to 6 years. Artificial intelligence, algorithms. We've got to start thinking different. This week when I saw that State of the Union, all I could see was just an old way of being. You know, it's reached a point where it's a joke. It's like the Cardinals electing a pope and they put up the smoke and all of this. It's a joke at this point. There's no solutions to come from these people. I mean, the building, the way that they're sitting in their chairs and all this is so old. And it's just words. But real things are happening. One of the things that happened that came out this week, this story should shock you, and it should shock you awake, because I've been talking about this for the better part of a year. It's upon us now. Wendy's. From Activist Post, it begins. Wendy's installs robots in 1,000 stores to counter minimum wage. This is syndicated from the Free Thought Project. As politicians deceive their constituents into thinking financial success can come through an act of legislation, employers will find a way to offset this cost. It will either come through higher prices or, in this most recent Wendy's case, robots. To offset the costs of being forced to pay employees $15 an hour, Bob Wright, Wendy's chief operating officer, told investors last week, Wendy's has found a solution. In the past 2 years, Wright noted, Wendy's has figured out how to eliminate 31 hours of labor per week from its restaurants and is now working to use technology such as kiosks to increase efficiency. The automated kiosks serve two purposes. They give younger customers an ordering experience that they prefer, and they reduce labor costs. So, Christian, this is just a kiosk, right? Eliminating 31 hours of work per week. Well, that's basically one employee.
Right.
That's one employee per Wendy's that's gone. These things supposedly pay themselves off in 2 years. That's just an ordering kiosk.
Interesting.
That's not somebody actually making something in the back, right? And I'm assuming it's probably not a drive-through. But you think of what could be done with an app on the phone. Like this thing, it's not like the technology stops.
Yeah.
It's not like you have a money-saving technology that eliminates one worker and you don't, and all of a sudden now this creates a demand.
Right, and this is the introduction.
This is the beginning.
Right.
This is like,
it's already being done with with your social media, with other things,
Sure.
automation
Sure.
and marketing, stuff like that. But when you see it introduced where it's actually taking the place of another human being, that's where it becomes a little.
and this is about that $15 an hour situation, right? So this is, we're gonna regulate our way to prosperity with this $15 an hour. No, you're gonna regulate yourself right out of a job. Now, automation has been not just eliminating jobs, though. In some ways, it's created other jobs in other sectors, like Uber, right? Interesting story about Uber, and I think that this is the greatest example so far of agorism in real life. When people talk about what is agorism, as entrepreneur, as kind of activist, and solutions to go outside of the state. This is a really interesting story. One of the things that's most interesting about it, throw up this New York Times thing. One of the things that's most interesting about it is the way that the mainstream media is framing the story. Like this New York Times article, How Uber Deceives the Authorities Worldwide. Really with a negative connotation, Uber is deceiving authorities worldwide. So this author, Mike Isaac, he went on CNBC. To give you a background on this story, Let's go ahead and play this gray ball video, and let's let Mike Isaac describe it for you and tell you what's going on.
This about another potential scandal regarding Uber.
The New York Times reporting Uber has utilized a program for several years to deceive law enforcement officials in cities where the ride-sharing service was outlawed. Minutes ago, Uber sent CNBC this statement. It says, this program denies ride requests to fraudulent users who are violating our terms of service, whether that's people aiming to physically harm drivers, competitors looking to disrupt our operations, or opponents who collude with officials on secret stings meant to entrap drivers. Joining us now is the reporter of this story, Mike Isaac of the New York Times. Welcome, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So in the Uber, let's back up for a second so people know what we're talking about. This is a program called Gray Ball, which in the description that you have in the story here makes it so that if I'm a cop in a city where Uber's not allowed, in Portland is your example here, I believe, and I tried to hail Uber, at least as of a couple of years ago, I would be grayballed because they knew I was a cop. I would get ghost cars on my app that weren't real ones. Is that right?
Yeah, so essentially they set up the program in 2014, 2015, when a lot of the cities that now Uber's legal in didn't really have a framework for UberX, their low-cost program. So code enforcement officers and in some cases law enforcement officers would set up sting operations in order to catch drivers operating what the city would say illegally. Uber would contend that they were operating within the bounds of the law, and essentially tag them or grayball them and be able to evade them afterwards. You know, whether that was sending them a fake version of the app or blocking them entirely,
right.
Or just So it was pretty crafty.
Okay, so let's revisit the statement from Uber where they say, they admit that they were trying to avoid opponents who collude with officials on secret stings meant to entrap drivers. I mean, they admit that that's what this is all about. I guess it comes down to the issue of whether they're operating illegally in cities where they have been prohibited from operating, right?
Yeah, I think Uber's point here is that they used these tactics for a number of different purposes, and my sources, confirm this too. There are countries in which they operate now in which drivers are under attack from taxi cab companies or other people who don't want Uber there, and so Uber would use some of these tools to obfuscate their location and keep the drivers safe, and that's totally fair. What I found is that this other sort of branch of how they used grayballing was to evade code and law enforcement, and that was something they did systematically and printed up a playbook and distributed it to general managers in dozens of cities all over the world.
So this was not just an incident isolated to Portland and a handful of officers they were aware of. You're saying if I was a cop or a code enforcer in one of many cities, maybe Las Vegas, where Uber wasn't allowed, most likely if I tried to use this, is it the case maybe even personally? Would the app basically just not work for me?
So if they ended up grayballing you, the thing is they didn't want to outright ban code enforcement officers or police officers because they didn't learn anything else if they banned you from using the service. So keeping you in, seeing how many times you open the app and what devices you were using to access the app actually helped Uber learn more about code enforcement officers' tactics, or Lyft and their competitors' tactics, or taxi cab companies and their tactics. So they actually learn more from keeping you on the app.
All right, so let's take it to the next step then, Mike. What next? I mean, are we likely to hear from prosecutors in various cities willing to prosecute them for the use of this app, this device?
It's really hard to tell, just because this happened 2 years ago. They still say that they're using it mostly outside of the country to protect driver safety. But I talked to a lawyer when I was reporting this out, and there are questions of whether they were obstructing justice in order to sort of escape code enforcement officers or not, or if they were breaking any other potential laws, federal laws versus state laws. So it's really a matter of whether prosecutors in these states or at a federal level want to pursue it.
Now, this is an incredibly crazy thing for us to be talking about in a country that is supposed to be a capitalist country, that is supposed to be free to do business. Here we have people actually saying, Uber is not allowed to use their app however they see fit. I want you to stop and I want you to think, okay? When you go to google.com or when you log into your Facebook account, you are agreeing to allow Google to show you whatever ads Google wants to show you. Facebook can do whatever they want with your feed. They can show you whatever they want. They can ban people. We know this, right? They were going through talking about banning fake news because the idea is that when you sign up, you agree to terms of service, that you are going to use the app or the platform or the website in the way that they say you need to use it. If code enforcement or law enforcement or others are using the app in a way that is outside of the terms of service, Uber has every right to display whatever they want. If they want to show ghost cars, if they want to make it so that your little button doesn't work, if they want to change it around, that's their app. It belongs to them. The back end is theirs. They are a private company. They do not have any legal responsibility to show you any aspect of their back end or to do anything without a warrant. If you have probable cause, go get a warrant for their database. If you have probable cause, go get a warrant for their code. This is a Fourth Amendment violation. They have a right, just like a business has a right to tint its windows because they don't want anybody looking in. And let's be honest, it's not just law enforcement and it's not just code enforcement because, as she brought up, the city of Las Vegas, where we are. Well, let me tell you what happened in Las Vegas to Uber when they went live without the permission of the Taxi Cab Authority, which is basically a quasi-governmental agency that is run by the consortium of the big taxi cab companies, which is, I must say, it's the last vestige in this town of organized crime, of the mob. And they do shakedowns of the strip clubs and all kinds of stuff. Let me tell you what happened. Uber went live. The Taxi Cab Authority signed on to Uber. They started following the cars around, and they were rolling around in unmarked SUVs with guys with assault rifles and masks over their faces, balaclavas. And they would follow Uber cars, and when they would go to pick somebody up, they would watch, follow them to their destination, and then when the guy got out, they would jump out of those SUVs with assault rifles and masks, like some sort of terrorists, and they threw the Uber drivers and the passengers up against the car. This is the Taxi Cab Authority. Uber has every right to prevent that from happening to their drivers or their passengers. And Uber contended all of that. They contended that they didn't need to have the licensing that the Taxi Cab Authority was saying that they needed to have. And you know what? A judge agreed. Uber was in the right. But was there compensation from the Taxi Cab Authority for that type of violent behavior? No, there wasn't. So you know what? I applaud Uber. I'm not the only one. I think one of the people who addressed this very well, and who now I am an even bigger fan of after getting a chance to talk with him privately at Anarchapulco, and also after hearing his amazing night speech. He was the last speech of the day on, I believe, the second day of Anarchapulco, and brought the house down. That's Jeffrey Tucker. I love this piece that he did for fee.org. Let me pull this up here. This is from fee.org. Grayball, Uber's super cool app to subvert trolls. And I wish I could do it in the Jeffrey Tucker voice, but I can't. What can a company do about trolls who use their technology to hurt the company and other consumers? Reputation data for individual users are fantastic, but there's still the problem that users can make new accounts, What can you do? For a suspected malevolent troll who used the service, the company dropped an extra layer on their smartphone application. The passenger would call a car, someone would answer the query, but then the ride would be canceled. This happened repeatedly. The beauty of this strategy is that the person doesn't know what is happening, and the process discourages the creation of new user accounts. It's not blackballing. It's about being grayballed, which is the name of the application. Peacefully blocking bureaucrats. Awesome, right? It's especially valuable when you consider a primary use of the trick, prohibiting wicked sting operations by transportation authorities who were seeking to shut down consumer access to an alternative to municipal cabs. If the software sensed that the account was plotting an attack, grayball would go into effect. If the data points to a problem passenger, grayball goes into effect. So this is really the future, Christian. And kudos to Uber.
It's awesome.
Yeah, good on them for protecting their people. You know, I wish Airbnb would have done this. This goes a long way. But it's the new layer of security. Here's the issue. Now this thing was approved from the top of Uber through their legal department, everything. And obviously down to the highest levels of coding, because this would have gone to their security team, their security developers, right? Which are the most talented people usually in your on-staff developers. So this went through all of Uber. What municipal authorities, and these are municipal authorities, these are local authorities, which I believe is, you know, when people are like, we need to secede down to local government, you need to understand the most oppressive government and the government that most wants to shake you down is always local government. Usually the most corrupt government is also local government because they have the least oversight, right? So this was them subverting municipal government and basically protecting their business using technology and using a very peaceful technology.
It's very smart.
Yeah, and look, if you want to do a sting without a warrant, without all of this, then yeah, we have a right to protect ourselves.
Yep.
We always have had a right to protect ourselves. The Fourth Amendment says that you have a right to privacy. And that does extend to your business. And part of the terms of service, why do you have a privacy policy? Why do you have terms of service? This is to say what you will and will not allow to happen in your house. If you have the Uber app open, you are in Uber's house.
Exactly. It's their property.
It's their property. You're not allowed to if they don't want you making calls to their API, they can stop that. It's their right. You're accessing their servers with their permission under their terms of service. You don't just get to go willy-nilly. I don't care who you are. So this is important. I hope they keep at it. I hope other businesses
this is great stuff.
Focus on this in the same way. So, you know, which brings up local government and a concern that came up this week. This is the one thing that we will talk about in terms of Trump, I guess, or it's pseudo-Trump, and at least a little bit. That's news. That's our second news story. That's news number 2. So when I was away at Anarchapulco, there were quite a few discussions about, will we be decriminalizing? Will we be legalizing? As people know, I'm completely against legalization, aka taxation and regulation of marijuana or any drug. I believe in decriminalization. I believe we should be able to stick into our bodies what we want to stick into our bodies, and that it should be off the books, particularly when it comes to weed, particularly when it comes to a plant, you know, where there's really not even any processing. You grow it, you dry it out, you smoke it, you're done. It's been used for thousands upon thousands of years. And most people in the United States now agree. And so there's a patchwork of laws across the United States between decriminalization, legalization, medical marijuana, you know, recreational, that we've got that here in Nevada, some other states, and we voted on it in the last election. It's coming to fruition now with the legal recreational taxed and regulated. The new Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, made some comments about weed, got people up in an uproar. I guess weed stocks started falling. People were worried that Jeff Sessions was going to make a crackdown on weed. You may recall that the Obama administration had basically put a moratorium on the DEA going after weed in states where it was legal. I think that's a good decision. People were worried Jeff Sessions was going to change that around, or the Trump administration was going to change that around. I did not believe that that was going to happen, and it turns out that that's not what's going to happen. We got this Sessions story. This is from Politico. Sessions reassures senators no pot crackdown imminent. Worries about a shift in federal enforcement in states that have legalized recreational use may be overblown. The Trump administration is causing serious paranoia among marijuana advocates with its hints of a federal crackdown on recreational use. But Attorney General Jeff Sessions has privately reassured some Republican senators that he won't deviate from an Obama-era policy of allowing states to implement their own marijuana laws. Sessions has rattled both libertarians and liberals in ordering a review of the hands-off pot policy under President Barack Obama. But Sessions provided some private assurances to senators before he was confirmed that he was not considering a major shift in enforcement, despite his opposition to the use of marijuana. He told me he would have some respect for states' rights on these things, and so I'll be very unhappy if the federal government decides to go into Colorado and Washington and all of these places, and that's not what my interpretation of my conversation with him was, that this wasn't his intention, said Senator Rand Paul in an interview. So I figured this, Christian. I figured that this was people, God, they just want to find anything that they can find wrong and protest about Trump, right? It's just yet another excuse to do that. But that's how you get a civil war.
Yeah.
Really. Like, the states have made a decision. The states have made a decision, and now in the states where it's legal, the states are making money, right? They're taxing it. You're going to go in and hurt as Donald Trump administration is going to send his DEA to take money out of the state's hands? Not going to happen. Not going to happen. And the other thing is, if it's legal, you have a whole new industry. The employees they're either on 1099s or they're actual employees. They're paying taxes. They're paying payroll taxes.
Yep.
These businesses, right? That's what I don't understand. Like, what they're just not thinking, or they just don't understand that this is a money game.
Yeah.
It's a money game. But people on the other side who are all about legalizing it, we're gonna speak with Raeford Davis, our guest, about where he stands on legalizing or decriminalization. I'm interested to hear what a police officer actually thinks about this
Right.
sort of situation. I'm against legalization. I'm all about decrim. But there was this story that came out about the idea of legalizing weed on a federal level. This is from Activist Post, syndicated from the Free Thought Project. This is a federal weed legalization story here. From Activist Post via freethoughtproject.com. Landmark bill introduced in Congress would legalize cannabis on a federal level. In an effort to push back against repressive federal control of marijuana policy, bipartisan legislation was introduced in Congress by Representatives Tom Garrett from Virginia and Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii to exclude cannabis from the Federal Controlled Substances Act, which absurdly lists marijuana as a Schedule I substance, a classification that denotes a substance being dangerous and having no known medicinal value. Passage of this legislation would provide states with the exclusive authority to regulate marijuana how they see fit, without the ominous threat of federal criminalization. In a prepared statement, Representative Garrett explained that states are more than capable of deciding what policies best benefit their own citizens without the need for federal oversight. If passed, this bill would take marijuana off the federal controlled substances list, joining other industries such as alcohol and tobacco. Passage of the Ending Marijuana Prohibition Act of 2017 would remove cannabis from the CSA so that it would no longer be listed as a substance regulated by federal law. This bipartisan legislation would empower states to establish their own marijuana regulations, which would allow for more flexibility in creating policy. Okay. Here's one of these very interesting moments where you need to think, where principle and pragmatism have to sort of have a meeting point. So one thing that you have to understand is when you have marijuana criminalized and on the federal controlled substances list, but you have states going in an opposite direction, it creates a situation where the only thing that the DEA really can do to respect states' rights is they have to do what they're doing, which is just basically decide that they're going to ignore and allow the states to have their way. However, if this were to go through, one of the things that you need to consider is that the federal government does have the right to regulate interstate agricultural trade. So, if they take this off the controlled substance list, and let's say Nevada weed then, at this point, if you grew weed in Nevada and you moved it to California to sell it, even to legal states, the feds could bust you for trafficking. But in this case, they could still regulate it. Again, it's a money game. It's got to be completely taken off the books, this whole thing. The more that you seek to try to get away from this criminalization, the more that you move it into the zone where it can be regulated. You think corn's not regulated? You think wheat has no regulations? They're not criminal. But if you think about it, it's almost better if they're criminal in terms of, especially if the government's taking their hands off it, and they're saying that they're taking their hands off it. So, Christian, this is something that people really need to be paying attention to. When I was down, I guess, at Anarchapulco, there were a lot of discussions about legalization and decriminalization of drugs, prostitution. Mm-hmm. These are issues that libertarians deal with, obviously. Gun rights.
Yep.
New Hampshire turns out to be a place. I'm actually going to have Ian Freeman on. We're going to have him in the next couple of weeks to discuss a little bit about New Hampshire. But New Hampshire is one of the freest states around. I didn't have all the information and understand all the things with New Hampshire. We're going to be covering it more. I'm actually going to be speaking now at Porcupine Fest.
Awesome.
In June. Got invited. The head of the Free State Project the president of the Free State Project was at my talk on agorism. He asked me to give it again up there and give my thoughts on, they have a bill to decriminalize sex work, give some thoughts on a panel there. So that should be interesting. New Hampshire actually has made some moves as well. And I want to talk about this. So this is this New Hampshire story. This is from thedailychronic.net, which is one of the best names. So this is New Hampshire marijuana bill decriminalization advances. Legalization bill killed. Says New Hampshire won't be joining neighboring states of Maine and Massachusetts in legalizing marijuana, but the Granite State could soon follow the rest of their New England neighbors in treating marijuana possession as a violation rather than a crime that carries a penalty, including the possibility of jail time. Lawmakers in the New Hampshire House Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee voted 14-2 on Tuesday to advance a bill to decriminalize marijuana possession, but elected to send a bill that would legalize marijuana for adults to further study, effectively killing the measure for the year. House Bill 640, sponsored by a bipartisan coalition of 6 Republican and 6 Democrat lawmakers, would reduce the penalty for marijuana possession of up to 1 ounce by someone 21 years or older to a violation, punishable only by a fine. Fines would be set at $100 for a first offense, $200 for a second offense, or $350 for a third or subsequent offense. The bill was advanced on a 14-2 vote and will now be considered by the full House. Meanwhile, House Bill 656, which would have legalized the possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana or 5 grams of hashish and personal cultivation of 6 cannabis plants for adults 21 or over, was held for further study by a vote of 15-1, effectively killing the bill for the year. Christian, the difficult thing for me with this is not decriminalization. I just saw another story today from Haaretz that was basically saying Israel did the same thing. It is not decriminalization if you get caught by a police officer with an ounce of weed. Well, it's, what is it? Less than an ounce of weed.
Yeah.
Right? Up to 1 ounce. You still have to pay a fine. For $100 for the first offense, $200 for a second offense, and $350 for a third or subsequent offense. The cops are still stopping you. And what happens if you have more than an ounce? What happens if you have 2 ounces? It's still the same. Like, all you're doing is you're just setting the bar lower, but you haven't decriminalized it. Decriminalization is taking it out of the criminal code. If weed is still in the criminal code, it's not decriminalized. We have to be really, really careful, and we have to be really clear, and we have to be very precise when we use this word decriminalization. And when we use the word, that's just changing the criminal statute.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Changing the criminal statute, changing the penalty is not decriminalization. Yeah. Just like we need to not call taxation and regulation legalization. People get the wrong idea. Everybody thinks legalization and decriminalization, in their mind, they're like, oh, I can smoke weed now.
Yeah.
I can have as much weed as I want. I can grow weed. It's like, no, you can't. Even with this decriminalization in New Hampshire, supposedly a free state, can you grow weed? I'll tell you when it's decriminalized. When it's decriminalized is when I can have a plot of land that's an acre of land, and I'm as free on that land to grow weed as I am to grow not even corn. Let's say some non-edible plant. Yeah. As I am free to plant orange trees. Right? As I'm as free to plant fruitless plum trees on my property. If I'm as free to plant weed and then to carry, and if I can roll around town with a truck filled to the brim with weed the same way that I can put a whole bunch of little baby plum trees in the back of my truck and roll, so long as they're secured, no cop is going to stop me for that. That's decriminalized.
So it's basically just an illusion that they...
Complete illusion.
Magic.
Complete illusion. I'm like, I don't even understand. Like, why are we doing these half measures? Like, why are we doing that? It's bullshit. Like, let's either do it or don't do it.
Yeah.
Because you still have a black market. On the one side, this supposed decriminalization, you've got a black market, right? And on the other side, the government's just making money off it. Now it's regulated.
Do you think the black market's going to get, well, in Nevada with the legalization, do you think it's going to get bigger or smaller?
Well, I mean, look, you're still going to have a black market for people under the age of, it's 21, right? Which, to me, I'm like, I feel like most of the people who get busted with weed are between the ages of probably about 17 and 21. Yeah. I feel like that's the sweet spot of getting busted with weed. It still is completely illegal for a 19-year-old to have weed on him or to buy weed. He can go off into the military, right? Exactly. He can die. Yeah. He can vote. So he could vote to legalize weed, but he can't smoke the weed that he voted to legalize.
Crazy.
All of these things, man. And this is why I think this is part of the broader discussion. The broader discussion is, do you have a right to tell someone else who is of the age of consent, who can sign a contract, who can go and live on their own, who's considered an adult, who if they commit a crime, now that's the funny thing, right? 18 years old, gets caught with, so let's say you've got a friend who's 25. He goes off, he buys some legal weed at the store, gives you some. You're 18 years old, you're legally an adult. You're driving around, you happen to have it on you, cop pulls you over, searches you, finds it. It's illegal for you to have that. Like, you can vote, you're of the age of consent, you can sign a contract.
You can go to
war. But you can't have a joint in your pocket.
And that, which breaks down to you can't choose to put what you want into your own body.
And at that point, you haven't even put it in your own body. You just can't.
You just have
you
it,
have plant matter.
Yeah.
You're carrying around plant matter. And I think that that's the place where we have to look and we have to say, this is not going to work. This does not make sense on a level of principle. Like, you either are or you aren't. And who makes that decision? When did 21 become the age?
Right.
You know, one of the most interesting things, there were some very brilliant people that I met at Anarchapulco. One guy is actually kind of an investor and heavily involved in a new vaccine technology, which is actually doesn't have the adjuvants and doesn't cause the problems.
Interesting.
Very interesting conversation with him. But he said, oh, I know how to solve all of this. He said, raise the age of consent for everything to 25. Raise it all to 25. Age of consent to legally consent to sex, to be able to smoke, to be able to drink, to be able to join the military. Raise it all to 25 and watch how everybody realizes how ridiculous it is.
Yeah.
Right? Raise it all to 25. So a 30-year-old person having sex with a 23-year-old would be guilty of statutory rape. And a 22-year-old with alcohol or with weed would get arrested for underage possession. Just raise the age because it's an arbitrary age. And then because that's when you start to see how ridiculous it is.
Yep. See the ridiculousness. Yep.
And I think that's important, man. I think that when we talk about these stories, it's important, the sort of absurdity of it all is a very, very important point. And that it's not about, in some ways, it's not about taking it seriously. It's about showing people what the truth is. And then when things come up, about joking about it a little bit. Like, you have to recognize the absurdity. You know?
It's great.
What do we got in terms of time here? I tell you what, why don't you check on our guest, Raeford Davis, and pop over to me. I'm going to just intro our next interview. We're going to go to break, and then we're going to come back with an interview. This is a very important interview for me that I wanted to do. One of the things that I'm seeing a lot of online is I'm seeing an ongoing discussion / argument and a lot of cop bashing. I've done a lot of soul searching on this issue. Obviously, as agents of the state and me being an anarchist, I'm not a supporter of the police force. However, there's a big difference between the institution of the police and individual police officers. And I think that as libertarians, as anarchists, as voluntarists, we do ourselves a great disservice when we immediately dismiss as, what have I heard, badged orcs, cockroaches, the classic, pigs. If we do all of that, we immediately turn off a group of people who potentially can make a difference and can make a change. When their will changes, when they are less willing to enforce laws that are bad, Like we have these cops in the sheriffs in Texas who have decided they're not going to arrest anybody with less than who's got 4 ounces or less of weed on them, possession. I mean, that's really powerful. That's without any law being passed or anything. That's a stand that the police can take if we're able to bridge those gaps. And so my guest coming up after the break, Raeford Davis, is someone who is helping to bridge those gaps. We're going to learn his story and his thoughts, and hopefully get some advice and some knowledge that we can use as tools moving forward, because I think that this is a place that the liberty movement can do a lot better. So we're going to go to break, and then we will be back with our guest for today, Raeford Davis. Welcome back to the Vin Armani Show. We are streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Vin Armani. Also on Twitter and Facebook at Vin Armani is my handle there. And of course, we are streaming live on the Facebook page of our content partner, Activist Post. That's facebook.com/Activist Post. So I am back, and I have a guest that I am very excited to bring on. If you would, Christian, our guest today is Raeford Davis. Raeford Davis served the City of North Charleston Police Department for 6 years, including 4 years as a patrol officer and 2 as a Special Victims Unit detective. At the time, North Charleston was ranked the 8th most dangerous city in America. Raeford retired in 2007 after being injured in the line of duty. Today, he lives in Charleston and works with Law Enforcement Action Partnership, LEAP. LEAP is a nonprofit organization composed of police, prosecutors, judges, and other criminal justice professionals who use their expertise to advance drug policy and criminal justice reforms that improve public safety. With 150 speakers across the United States, LEAP representatives reach millions of Americans each year through educational programs and media interviews. Raeford Davis, welcome to the Vin Armani Show.
Thank you, Vin, for having me on.
I am really excited about this interview, and I have been for a while. I think, I don't know if you heard my little intro, if you were brought on before we went to the break, but I think that particularly in this voluntarist movement, in the anarchist movement, in the more sort of principled libertarian movement, there is, and I think it's natural, there's some natural animosity towards law enforcement. But I do know that, just like in any population, that there are good cops and there are bad cops. And I think it is a place where finding the place and finding the alliances with those police officers who truly, as individuals, want to better society is, I think, a great place for us to start. You are somebody who I ran across. Your views are... They seemed unique to me, but I guess there are more people that feel like you do in terms of wanting a more voluntary society, but you come from a law enforcement background. Can you just, so that we can get this started, talk a little bit about your journey, sort of how you decided to become a police officer, and then if you could walk us through to how you've come to the place that you're at now and what exactly the place is that you're at now, and then I think we can carry on from there.
All right, yeah, so I started off as a police officer in 2002, the City of North Charleston. I grew up, conservative, kind of like what I consider a compassionate conservative, and I wanted to help my community. And so what better way than to be a cop? I felt like I had good judgment, and I wanted to get out there and do the tough job and get out on that, serve on that line and protect the the more vulnerable and make my community a better place. And that's what most officers, that's what they join up for. They want to make a difference and help. And isn't that what we're taught, from a very early age, is that, law enforcement's a great and honorable position. And hey, we do have real crime, and there's real criminals out there, and there's bad guys, and you need tough men that are and women that are going to stay in that line and get out there and face them so others don't. And then I got out there in North Charleston, and I saw, really very quickly that a lot of what we were doing wasn't working. I'm out in a community that had problems with, particularly with drug enforcement, that they had problems for years. There were cops better than me for the past 20 years that had been working those same streets. And here I was out there just as motivated and dedicated as I could be. I could stand on the street corner, with my arms folded and, just daring drug dealers to try to peddle their wares, near me. And what would they do? They would move 3 streets down, and it would continue. I was uncomfortable, a little bit with, kind of how aggressive we were as far as, traffic stops and patting people down, using canines to search people's cars. And then, the canine dog would scratch their car up and, the person's just out of luck. Hey, that's just, cost of doing business kind of thing. That's the main thing. From a practical purpose, it didn't work, and it bothered me kind of morally and consciously. I knew something wasn't right. I kind of saw that, everything I did was legal, but I felt a kind of a conscience pulling at me, and I got an opportunity to get out of patrol, and I went into our special victims unit. We did child abuse, child sexual assault. And because I wanted to deal with real victims and real crime. And now we did some good work there, but also we had a lot of issues. And I saw specifically that we were understaffed, and we had a lot of narcotics detectives and people running guns and dope or working that angle. And me and 2 other detectives are buried trying to investigate child sexual assaults, and cases did not get the investigation they deserved. So definitely kids were victimized that we were not able to prosecute properly. And what really bothered me was cases were not investigated to a proper degree, and people were charged that were very likely innocent. And that was one of the last things that I just really demotivated me. I did. Now, the reason I'm no longer a police officer, I was directing traffic at a car accident, and I got hit by a truck and broke my leg. And so I guess in some ways I'm lucky that I, half crippled and just walk with a limp. But that's that's why I got out, was for that physicality. But personally, I don't think I would have lasted much longer. Just that kind of a crisis of conscience was really causing me to kind of self-destruct. And you see that with a lot of police officers. I think that's what is misdiagnosed as like PTSD, is really like a moral injury or a crisis of conscience. Based on the actions that we do. And just for practical purposes, so much of really drug enforcement, that's a huge deal. That creates so much of the violence and crime, and then creates the excuse for so much of the liberty destruction and that law enforcement subjects are to.
What would you say your time out on the streets, in terms of your stops or searches that were suspected, maybe that you were suspecting that there were drugs, what would you say would be the percentage of time that you would actually find something as versus the percent that you would just be basically shaking down somebody and it turns out that they had nothing on them?
The percentage is pretty low. what, 20% of the time? But so you justify that because you say, well,
wait, so you're saying 20% of the time they would have drugs, or 20% of the time 80%?
Yeah, they would have something that, some type of arrestable or chargeable.
But 80% of the time you'd just be shaking somebody down 8 times out of 10.
Yeah, and so you justify that by saying, well, they're probably up to no good anyway, so I just didn't catch them this time. But I've sent a message to them that we're out here, and anytime you can be stopped. And a lot of times that's probably the truth. But again, looking back at it now, what business did we have of going and grabbing people and dragging them out of their cars and looking for dope? That should be perfectly legal, and there's really no constitutional authority or anything like that. Sure, it's legal, and you would use that excuse, well, if you don't like the law, you need to go ahead and change it. That's kind of how I would justify that. So, I got into law enforcement against Prohibition. They've changed to rebranded to Law Enforcement Action Partnership. We've kind of expanded out to more kind of policing issues. And because there's a lot of cops like me that say, hey, and from all different political persuasions, from conservatives to progressives, and then you have libertarian anarchist volunteers like myself, but because we all join together in a common theme is that drug enforcement and prohibition actually makes our society less safe. It makes cops less safe. It gets them in positions where they're going to get injured or killed. So I want to look out for the cops. And particularly on a moral perspective, cops harm themselves morally when they unjustly use violence against another person. Drug use and sales and trade, that's consensual activity between adults. And when you as a police officer, even if you do it very nicely, if you put your handcuffs on someone and you lock them in a cage, you are the one initiating that violence. And legal or not, it's unjust. It's morally wrong, and you will suffer moral injury to yourself. So personally, I'm saying, cops, look out, man, you're harming yourself. I'm not so worried about the crackheads, I mean, I should be. And,
so,
but in a way, I'm calling out to the cops, hey, you're harming yourself. And so, so when I talk to you today, LEAP, I believe in the legalization and regulation of all drugs.
Right.
And we all have our own opinions. Sure. So, a lot of what I'm talking about is really my opinion, but it's consistent with it. A lot of people at LEAP, they're all different ideas.
I want to talk a little bit about, before we get into the specifics of the drug stuff, I do think something that you brought up is very, very important. Our guest actually 2 weeks ago, Dr. Jordan Peterson, is a clinical psychologist and becoming very well known. I heard him once talking about, in one of his lectures, about PTSD studies, and that they actually say that most PTSD, the vast majority, as a matter of fact, is not caused by something that happened to the person suffering from PTSD. Instead, it's actually caused by what that person did. So if we're talking about someone in the military that, you go off to war, it's much often less about, let's say you were blown up, there's an IED, and that, and that's often less than the fact that you killed somebody, or you hurt somebody, or there was some collateral damage or something. So I think it is very important, and it's also, I think, a place to have some empathy for law enforcement officers, that every single time, as you say, that you slap those cuffs on somebody and you throw them in a cage, and if there's that little doubt in your mind that perhaps it is legal what you're doing, but that they may be innocent or not deserving of what's happening to them, that each one of those is causing a psychological trauma. Like you're having this moral dilemma, it's causing psychological trauma, and did you find as time went on, you were talking about that you wouldn't have lasted much longer there. did you find that it became more and more difficult for you just to live sort of with yourself on a day-to-day basis after doing the things that you were doing? And then what I want to know is, what were the things inside the culture within both the department and law enforcement in general? What were the types of, because obviously everybody's going through this, what were the types of things within the culture to try and motivate you to move forward and to keep doing that? And at what point in your training or your profession, at what point did that start? Did it start at an academy? Was it something later between people? Was it official? Was it unofficial? I mean, I guess that's a long question, but I mean, if you could, maybe if you could start with, was it difficult for you on a day-to-day dealing with just being with yourself?
You know, when you see your actions not really working, you know, just kind of in a general level. Yeah, so if you arrest somebody for drugs or guns, and again, we did have real criminals and shootings and assaults, and of course, you know, all that's a product of the you know, of the Prohibition to begin with. But I mean, it was real crime, and so you would, you know, 20% of the time or whatever, you're actually doing good work. So that keeps you in the system. And also, everybody tells you you're doing the right thing. Your sergeants, your lieutenants, your politicians, your pastors, you know, all the leaders, and you know, traditionally in government and in our society says, hey, what you're doing is right. So that feeling that something's wrong, you say, well, that must be me. So you can't really face it and understand it. And it doesn't matter whether you think you're doing justice or not. That moral injury will affect you regardless. It's just like gravity. You can deny gravity, but you're going to feel it. The same type of thing. And you're committed. And so if you see that your policies or whatever you're doing aren't working, you blame yourself. I'm not dedicated enough. You know, I haven't put enough of myself on the line, and so you consider it a personal failing. So you get out there and you get harder, and then you get frustrated with you know, the people that you deal with in the community, and so you take it out on them. And in a way, you're blind to it when you're in law enforcement. Like I said, I guess I was lucky that I got injured. Yeah, and so, you know, I got hit by a truck. I'm half crippled. Does that cause me PTSD from that? Yeah, you know, I'm sorry it happened, but you know, not so much. I had people try to shoot me and kill me, and traumatic events for sure. You know, and I saw, you know, children that had died, those type of things. That's difficult, and that is traumatic, and that has stayed with me. But absolutely, the main thing is the harm that I caused. And it's very minor stuff. I didn't shoot anyone. I came very close. I didn't shoot anyone. I didn't put anybody in the hospital. You know, it's just these normal little benign arrests and just little harassments that I look back now was unjustified, that really have put a you know, kind of emotional burden on me that I was not able to face until I got out of law enforcement, and those scales fell from my eyes. And it's very difficult to admit that. You have to believe everything you've been taught and you've done that you did well intended was actually wrong and caused more harm. That's very hard on your ego. And not many people can do it. And of course, law enforcement, and you know, you talk about psychologists and everything, they can't really help you with it, because for them to face that would be to admit that a lot of what they do is immoral and unjust. So they pull on that thread, and their whole system falls apart. So you're not going to. That's why you can't face it, and that's why this PTSD, but particularly with police officers and soldiers as well, is such a problem that we just can't seem to treat.
So, you know, you talk about the scales falling from your eyes. What was the process through which that happened? You know, I think it's an important insight, because it is a place that I think it's, like you say, it's difficult to be honest with yourself. When or what was the impetus, what was the catalyst that made that happen for you? Because you've made the swing to voluntarism. That's about I mean, you're on from law enforcement to voluntarism is about as far of a political swing as I think one could make. When was the beginning of that transition for you?
Well, again, I kind of always grew up Christian and, conservative and so I was all, the Constitution. We just need to get back to the Constitution. We're away from that and destroy, and a lot of liberty has been destroyed. So I kind of knew from that. But it's one till I got out and, I started reading Ron Paul. I kind of came from it from that angle. Ludwig von Mies, Lysander Spooner. Oh,
he's my favorite, actually.
And that guy, I had to kind of let go of that Constitution. Mm-hmm. And I looked at drug war stuff. You're like, well, we just need to get back to what the founding fathers intended. And then you look at, you read about the Whiskey Rebellion with George Washington, and the very first use of American federal troops against its own population was a drug war where they impose a whiskey tax on people, and Washington led one of the largest armies that he had ever fielded to impose a tax on whiskey as a means of control and revenue generation. And so it's been downhill ever since for that Constitution. So you look at slavery and you look at moral principles. Slavery was immoral when it was legal, or Japanese internment or forced sterilization. All these are legal processes. And so you're saying today that we don't have anything that's maybe legal now, and the Supreme Court says is okay, that's actually immoral, and civil asset forfeiture, drug enforcement, those things, they're just there. And so you got to even step away from that Constitution and look at fundamental moral principles of human action. If your badge does not shield you from morality, those little politicians and even the Supreme Court do not shield you from fundamental moral principles of human interaction. If your action, if you cannot morally justify putting your hands on a neighbor, then a cop can't do it either. It is immoral, and you break all of that down, and wow, that kind of throws out a lot of government and just even the very idea of government, taxation, and all that comes with that.
Let me ask you, when you were on the force, were there discussions about, this situation could be so much better if marijuana was legalized? Is this something that police officers discuss, debate, or is this a third rail that just simply cannot be discussed sort of in public or in the course of your duties, or maybe even when you're in private with other officers off duty? Is this something that's off the table talking about, or is this something that officers do talk with each other about, that legalization would make your jobs easier? Not just easier in terms of less work, but easier morally to deal with. Is this something that officers do talk about?
Sure. And, again, police officers, you'd think they're drug experts or anything, but, we've been subjected to that same kind of DARE type propaganda, and even your police training is just a bunch of reefer madness in a lot of ways. And so would we talk about it? Yes. And most police officers would say, yes, marijuana needs to be legal. Prostitution and other vices and gambling should be legal to one degree or another. Mm-hmm. Now you talk about other drugs, and then that kind of automatic fear conditioning, even in the cops, kind of kicks in. Oh, we can't just envision that. So they're a little bit less active, will admit to that, because they just have that, that fear, and been propagandized, for 100 years, just like everybody else, and it's easy to confuse the harm that you see that's related to drug use and to to unpack all of that and say, no, that's prohibition enforcement that actually creates so much of the danger, the profit motives. You ask cops about alcohol prohibition in the 1930s, they go, oh yeah, that created all that crime.
Right.
And then you say, well, what about drugs? Well, that's cocaine's different.
Right.
And so it takes years. You look, that's what I've done as getting out as a police officer, is just look back. Whiskey Rebellion, opium wars in China.
Sure.
You look at some of the propaganda for the 1914 Harrison Narcotics Act, talking about cocaine crazed Negroes, and how the singer Billie Holiday, and how she was just demonized and attacked, and you see those racial components, and officers know that, but you just can't admit it today. No, I'm a good guy and I'm following the law. And you kind of fall back to that position.
So let's talk about where are you at? This is something that I discuss quite a bit in terms of my feelings on. I'm definitely against the drug war. I certainly, when it comes to marijuana, when it comes to other plants, there is absolutely no question in my mind that those just need to simply be off the books. I don't think that plants should be regulated at all. I don't think we should even be regulating interstate commerce of corn. You know what I mean? I think it's a plant. I think it's something that nature has. It gets into a little more of obviously a public safety issue when we're talking about processed and artificial chemicals. Although I'm for a stateless society and completely against the state being there. Even in a voluntary society, I think we're going to have, if we're going to allow some things that are health risks and that people can be exposed to poisons, that we're going to have some sort of mechanism for dealing with that. Where do you stand on? I guess we can start with marijuana, and because that's obviously the big discussion going on in the country at the moment and around the world, really, in the Western world. And then maybe we can move on to where you stand on the other drugs as well.
There's a lot of different ways to look at it. And first of all, with LEAP supports legalization and regulation. Now, we all have different opinions. So how does a voluntarist like myself support legalization and regulation? And I agree with it. Legalize and regulate. I would say regulation is extremely important. First of all, let me start. People believe that prohibition enforcement is like this ultimate level of regulation, when actually prohibition is the forced abdication of all regulation. No one is able to regulate illegal drugs. You can't do it. And so that's why we have these black markets and everything else. So I believe in legalization and regulation. As a voluntarist, I would say you can never initiate force or violence to do so, only in self-defense or, to prevent some type of imminent harm. I also would say that regulation is so important that the government should never have a hand in it, and that we can have voluntary interactions and voluntary communities and education and information to make people safer.
I like that. And do you feel that way for all drugs? Do you think that's a stand for all drugs? Are there some that are kind of exceptions? Bath salts, some thinking like crocodile, some of these crazy things that are really just poison? Or do you feel that that's sort of the foundational framework and baseline sort of for all narcotics?
Well, I really think marijuana is a gateway to legalization, and it's a gateway for people to understand that government really is a failed way of thinking. 65% of all illegal drug users is marijuana alone. So if you legalize marijuana, you have ended 2/3 of the drug war right there. And my focus is harm reduction. And so you want to reduce harm in society, you've got to reduce the harm that law enforcement causes prosecuting this drug war. So you've just legalized, 2/3 of the illegal population. And I think marijuana has a lot of benefits. It does cause harm. And I think you will see more people will use marijuana. People like my mother, that has these aches and pains, she's going to use it. And people with other medical issues. And I think that's why Big Pharma's worried, is because marijuana might actually work just a little bit better than their drugs, and it'll be a whole lot cheaper. And man, that'll kind of just put a big hammer to their whole sick care money making methods, and that will free people's minds and like, hey, what else have we been told that's wrong? And so it can be a gateway that way. Other drugs, sure. Again, the more dangerous a drug is, like heroin or fentanyl, that can, just a small change in the dosage could actually like kill you. Then again, very important to regulate it. And I would say the government is a terrible regulator. And so, you would have to kind of back away from that. And so we just have so much, so much propaganda. You think of LSD as this crazy, deadly drug. I've never tried LSD. I don't know a whole
quite a few times, and it's pretty amazing. I'm glad that I did.
And so people like you and say, hey, you know what, this could be a very positive drug, and then other people say, man, you got to watch it. It can be dangerous. But guess what? There's only 5 people in all of history since LSD was created that that LSD is associated with their death, and those are kind of debatable. So really, as LSD hasn't even killed anyone, directly from an overdose. So can we think about that stuff? We've got to break down all that propaganda and look at it from a more practical standpoint. But you can't use violence. If somebody wants to use LSD or they want to do heroin, then you can't. You and your neighbors, I don't care if your neighbor's a pastor and an army general or whatever, you can't just go storm in their house and drag them out of their home and shoot them if they resist you. Now, if they're just totally high and going down the road and about to kill someone, can you stop them?
Right.
Yes, of course. That would be like an imminent danger. Are they fixing to kill a kid with it? Yes, you could stop them. A normal person could intervene interpose on another person's behalf, and so that would be justified. And so that's why we have to start looking at these things.
So one thing now, this is one of the most important things to me, I think, in this interview, and I'm hoping that we can get into it. And I'm not asking you to provide all of the solutions, but I think that this is certainly the beginning of a conversation. The liberty movement is growing by leaps and bounds. I know that there are probably other officers out there watching this, either live or recorded, and maybe this is something that they're not talking about. Maybe these ideas and thoughts. I mean, there's no shortage. I think this election and previous elections, but like you say, I mean, there's been no shortage of officers who were in support of Ron Paul. So, what I would like to talk about is how do we start to bridge the gap between those of us who are libertarians, voluntarists. I hate to use the term anarchist when trying to talk with law enforcement. I think that's probably a non-starter, right? And because it has a lot of connotations to it that it's not worth explaining. But as libertarians in particular, as voluntarists, where are the places where we can start bridging these gaps especially with current law enforcement? What are the concepts that you have come across and found that even when you were an officer were things that you could get behind, that you would be like, yeah, in general, I agree with that. Obviously, it's not going to be the things about there should be no government, because then there's no paycheck for the officers, clearly, and I get that. What are some concepts that are some places where we can find some common ground, do you think, that are things that when we speak with each other that we can connect on and find some rapport?
Yeah, I agree. I would consider myself an anarchist, but you use that word and it just, it's just, you think everybody thinks a lot of chaotic, negative things. I like the word voluntarist. And so, say, no, I'm not a pacifist. Yes, you can defend yourself against force, fraud, and coercion. And you just understand these guys have a long way to go, to kind of come around. But what you can do, and what helped me, was just people, like yourself, talking about these issues and saying, look, what we're doing now is not working. Now, all cops understand that what we are doing now, in a lot of ways, is not working. The United States, we're the world's leader in incarceration rate. We would have to reduce our incarceration rate by 80% in the United States just to equal the average in Europe. And those are those are socialist countries, man. We're America.
Right.
I mean, we're the greatest country in the world. And we are, we'd have to let out 80% of people in jail just to equal what they do. That should give you pause. And so little things like that to kind of bring out and just to say, look, what we're doing is not working. And here's, this is when you use in a voluntarist way, when you use violence or force or fraud or coercion, even though you're trying to make a positive impact, those type of methods will always fail and become counterproductive. And so whatever you're kind of an expert at and you can talk about, then you reach out to them that way. You can't drag them. They've got to come on their own.
I like that. And I think that this is, as I say, it's very much the beginning of a conversation. I know that especially the sort of out anarchist movement is still pretty young, and I know that it congeals online, although we're starting much more to meet each other in person. Like I was just down in Acapulco last week at Acapulco, and that was great, which you should go to next year, because I think that it's fantastic and you should probably speak at. I really want to thank you for coming on. This is great. Hopefully we can have you on again. This drug thing is not going away, and I think that we have a long way to go in the next several years trying to figure out how we as a society are going to handle ending the drug war and changing all of this. Is there any message that you wanted to say either to your fellow voluntarists or your fellow officers before you take off?
Well, first of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak out, Vin. I hope that just in little ways that you kind of, I'm able to kind of change people's minds again not only for society itself, but, the individual police officers, that I know they want to serve their community and there is a better way. And so ask yourself as a police officer, when is it okay to use violence against another person? And exactly how is it that laws and policy are they really able to alter morality? And how are they able to do that if so? And again, thank you. Yeah, thank you again for letting me to speak out, and I hope to do it again. Yeah, Acapulco, I would love to go there. That would be great.
Yeah, man. Next year for sure. I'm like the biggest advocate now. I'm telling everybody to go. I'm the biggest evangelist. So, Raeford Davis, thank you very much for being on the show, and we'll hopefully get to talk to you again soon. People, go and please check out Leap, leap.cc, and also, as you see there, you can go and follow Raeford on Twitter at RaefordD. So, Raeford Davis, thank you very, very much for being on the show.
Thanks again.
All right, see you soon. Bye-bye. So, Christian, I mean, we've got a long way to go, bro.
Yeah.
We've got
a lot of work to be done.
long way to go on this thing. But we're having the conversation. Who would have ever thought?
Right.
Like 10 years ago, would we have ever thought that we'd really be having a conversation of, should we be legalizing or should we be decriminalizing?
Right.
And how should we be legalizing? And it's and having officers, a police officer coming to voluntarism is a very, very good sign. Mm-hmm. Even in a voluntary society, what people have to remember is, even if it's anarchism, it's no rulers, it's not no rules.
Yeah.
We still have a need to have a society that is protected from those people, either within or without, who would be predators upon the society.
And I think for me, that's the biggest question is like, I understand the idea of expanding the consciousness to where we understand each other and we respect each other's rights and privileges and things of that nature. But when it comes to people that don't quite have that extension of consciousness yet, how do you resolve that issue? How do you, or I guess, do you even do it?
It's hard, man. I mean, look, this is an individualist philosophy.
Yeah.
So, I've said before that the difference between individualism and collectivism is with individualism, I know what's best for me.
Yeah.
In collectivism, you say, I know what's best for me and I know what's best for you. I think there's actually, Jordan Peterson actually has a better, maybe not better, but it's sort of a broader idea about it. And his idea is that in a collectivist ideology, you believe that you change the state, and by state he doesn't mean necessarily government, but just the culture.
Yeah.
That you change the rules of the game in order to change the behavior of the individual. Mm-hmm. In an individualist philosophy, you believe that you change the behavior of the individual, or the individual changes by changing his behavior. He will necessarily change the rules of the game.
Right.
And so I think
it's backwards.
It is. And, both of them have some basis. Like, both of them at various times in history is exactly what's needed.
Yeah.
But right now, I do feel that we're in a time where the state is old and corrupt and willfully blind, and we need to, as individuals, make an example.
Yeah.
Take
Absolutely.
on that moral responsibility, just like Raeford was talking about. For ourselves, we need to stop and think and say, is this right what I'm doing? And then we first, before seeking to change somebody else, we need to change ourselves.
Yeah.
And in changing ourselves, and that's so hard because sometimes you're all by yourself.
And sometimes your beliefs come from outside.
I think always, right?
Yeah.
They're always affected by your culture.
Like that, what Raeford was talking about, and Jordan Peterson also said it as well. Like, and I think most police officers aren't aware of this, that the PTSD, this is affected by what you do, not necessarily what happens to you.
That's right.
And it's, and that idea, that level of consciousness, understanding that will change everything. It changes the whole thing. And it's just really one idea that was boiled down or distilled down and understood, because it was understood as, okay, these things are happening to me, so I have this case or the syndrome or whatever it is. But, and understanding that really changes the perspective a lot.
Well, it's to say my actions will hurt me, right? It's
Exactly,
really this manifestation of karma, that it's like, no, it's not that necessarily something bad will happen to you in the future, but it's like, something bad. You're literally going to have a mental disability.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Peterson said that you're making a deal with the future.
That's right.
And that was...
That's right. I mean, in our actions, we are making a deal with the future. I think one of the most important things about the liberty movement is so broad. It's kind of it's the anarchist sort of voluntarist. There is a movement that's broader than, I guess, what we call the liberty movement, which really kind of came about, I guess, with kind of the Ron Paul movement at first. But there's something else. These things that we're dealing with is really an evolution of consciousness.
Yeah.
And it's not just the evolution of consciousness in terms of these abstract concepts, because our consciousness is actually evolving in a way, and there's concrete things that are following along with it that are going to change the world. And one of the biggest things, of course, with those for voluntarists and particularly for agorists is Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Which, as I said, was huge down at Anarchapulco. There was a whole day that was just cryptocurrencies, CryptoPulco, and there was a discussion of a lot of other currencies besides Bitcoin. Dash came up. But what I wanted to get into just as our last story before we go, because there was a big issue down there about what's coming in Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is becoming, in some ways, a victim of its own success. Mm-hmm. I want to talk about this. The biggest news was Bitcoin. Actually, let's do this. Let's go news number 3, because this gives me a chance to talk about our upcoming project. So this next little piece is going to be sponsored by countermarkets.com. This is our new newsletter. Us here at the Vin Armani Show and also the folks at Activist Post have put it together. Trends and strategies for maximum freedom. This is the first agorist newsletter. We are talking about how to do business and live in this new world where your consciousness is expanded and where we are looking towards a stateless society. We're looking to have the maximum freedom that we can and be profitable at the same time. You can go and sign up, countermarkets.com. We are doing the first edition, which is this March edition. We are doing that for free to you. Go and sign up, countermarkets.com. And since we're talking about Bitcoin, great article, the 5 most promising blockchain assets besides Bitcoin. So these are other counter economic currencies. These are other cryptocurrencies that will be coming into view in the near future. And we know that it's going to be moving in this direction because Bitcoin this week, for the first time, and this is huge in terms of a new type of money, Bitcoin surpassed the price of gold on the open market for the first time. We have this BTC gold story. This is from NBC News, as a matter of fact. The price of one Bitcoin surpassed the price of an ounce of gold for the first time in history on Thursday, March 2nd. A milestone some investors said solidifies the currency as digital gold. And you will remember the Stash Crypto guys describing it as such. By Thursday evening, the price of one Bitcoin was $1,271. According to CoinDesk's Bitcoin Price Index. Meanwhile, gold per ounce was priced at $1,235, according to Oklahoma-based precious metals retailer AP Mex. This is a really, really, really big deal. There are a lot of people that are starting to put their money into Bitcoin. As a matter of fact, one of the guys that I was hanging out with at Anarchapulco actually had not spent any fiat currency, any dollars or pesos. We'd go out to dinner, and when the check would come, he'd say, okay, who wants to pay for my dinner, and I'll pay you in Bitcoin. And he was doing this the whole time. I think I got about $80 in Bitcoin from him, which, by the way, have already gone up since that time. The price keeps rising. You want to see what Bitcoin looks like compared to gold? Check out this chart. Very interesting. Look at this. Look at the growth there. 2012, gold is obviously the place to stick your money. 2014, they almost met there, and then it, took a little dip. But look, bam, it's hit it twice. So the question is this a place for you to be putting your wealth? Is this a real currency? Is this something that people are really into? Well, yes, and this brings up why I say Bitcoin is becoming, in some ways, a victim of its own success. And while I do believe that there is a future in cryptocurrency, will it be Bitcoin? I'm not socking away all of my money because there are some issues. And this was an issue heavily discussed when I was down in Mexico. Huge debate over this. I'm going to just sort of quickly give you a breakdown of how Bitcoin works and then discuss with you what the potential problems are now as more people become interested if you are somebody who wants to invest in this. Again, countermarkets.com, we will be following this story as well. So basically, Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency. That means that it's a currency that's based on cryptography and codes. We won't get into all that. Basically, what you need to know is this. Bitcoin has a distributed ledger. So it has a record of every single transaction ever made in Bitcoin. So when I make a transaction, if I send some Bitcoin to Christian right now, that is sent out and it goes into, it's a transaction that then is put into a block and strapped onto a blockchain that basically anybody can look at. And a copy of that blockchain lives on every node or with every miner. And basically what happens is these miners, all they are is computers that have a copy of this big blockchain, this ledger of all of these transactions. And how they mine is they're trying to solve a very hard math problem. And determined by the number of miners in the network, essentially the problem gets harder and harder. And about every 10 minutes, a new block is added onto the chain. And within that block are a series of transactions. Right now, every block is 1 megabyte in size, 1 meg. So every 10 minutes, 1 meg gets added into the total size of this blockchain. And the miner that adds that in gets 1 Bitcoin and miner fees. But there's a problem. And the problem is that Bitcoin is growing like gangbusters. Here's what the growth looks like. You could see when Bitcoin was first launched in 2009 to now, 2017, we are in, you look at that, you've seen that curve before. That is an exponential growth curve. And that thing starts to go straight up. Basically, the problem that you have is that right now, just in the last year, the total size of that record that every single person who's got a node or who's mining has to have has gone from about 60 gigabytes in size to and it's now at about 100 gigs. And it's conceivable that by the end of the year, it could be maybe at 250 gigs. The problem that we have, the problem that exists is the guy who initially invented Bitcoin, or it could be a guy, it could be a group, Satoshi Nakamoto. We don't know who this person is. There's a few people who think they know who it is. Some people have tried to prove it. Whoever this person is could prove it by sending some Bitcoin from early addresses to somebody else. But whoever this person is, they're incredibly rich when it comes to Bitcoin, and they could be dead, they could be alive. They've been totally anonymous, which makes this whole thing kind of cool because it's got a mythological figure. Anyway, this person decided that the size of the blocks that they would make. So you imagine a block is a chunk of transactions. And then each block, 10 minutes, remember, goes onto the chain. This person set the size of the block at 1 meg. Could not get bigger. And at the 1 meg size, basically what it says is that the network can handle about 3 to 7 transactions per second. Now, Visa's network handles tens of thousands of transactions per second. So you figure if this is a worldwide currency being used, there's going to be a lot more transactions around the world than 3 to 7. And we're reaching that issue. So what's happening is, when you send a transaction, you also send a little fee along with it. That miners, they want to take the ones with the top fees to put in the block because the higher the fees total, the more money the miner gets for himself. It's how the miner basically gets paid to add a block onto the blockchain. What we're running into is a situation where if people don't have large fees and the network is congested, their transaction doesn't get added on. If your transaction doesn't get added on to the block, it's not verified. So it's got to go into the block, into the chain, and then something's got to be on top. Another block has to be on top of it. That's called a confirmation. And then 2, 3, it's got to get to about 6 confirmations. I know some of this is technical, but basically what you need to know is Bitcoin, as it stands, in very short order, is going to be either very slow in terms of you being able to make transactions, or it's going to cost a lot of money in fees for you to make your transactions. Now, when it gets beyond about, look, if you have Square, that's what, a 3% transaction fee, basically? If it starts getting much beyond that, which it already really is, for you to be able to do things on the blockchain, then Bitcoin is only going to be usable for big amounts to transfer money. That's not where most people would like it to be. Most people would like Bitcoin to be able to be used for day-to-day stuff. And it could up to a couple years ago. So there's a decision. Either there's one side, there's just a scaling issue, basically. We have the scaling thing, Christian. I won't go deeply into this, but it's something that we're going to be following. There's basically a discussion going on. If you're looking to get involved in Bitcoin right now, this is something that you need to think about. Otherwise, there are some other cryptocurrencies. So basically, Christian, here's what we've got going on. There's an argument. And what needs to happen is the overall block size needs to increase so that more transactions per second can happen, right? That's the issue. We got to increase this block size. There's one section of people who say, let's just let the miners decide how big the block should be. Mm-hmm. There's another, these people are called Bitcoin unlimited block size potential. There's another group that says they're the segregated witness side. Basically what they say is, no, actually there's a lot of like waste space inside the block as it currently is. Let's take that waste out and then fill it with other stuff. So let's just redesign how it is. So it's basically, you could say it's like this. One group says we need to be able to increase the amount of pages in the book.
Yeah.
And the other side says, no, let's take out all the footnotes and turn them into endnotes.
Okay.
And just, you get it? Does that make sense?
Right.
And either one of those will necessarily allow you to have a longer book. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's the discussion that's happening. How does that play out? How is that decided? This is what is kind of interesting. Bitcoin being decentralized, how that gets decided is each individual miner loads up a different version of sort of the library of how it gets handled. So you're a miner, you can have a segregated witness piece of software, and you say, I support segregated witness, or I support a library that has this Bitcoin unlimited functionality. And they're going back and forth. Neither one has enough to take over the whole network right now. If it doesn't happen, and it's possible that there could be a stalemate, if it doesn't happen, Bitcoin is going to get, as I say, either very slow or very expensive. And there are people on both sides who say, you know what, maybe Bitcoin will just become international transfer of like $10,000 or more, right, and you're willing to pay a $100 fee attached to it because those will be the only ones that'll be able to move. I would like it to stay usable.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of other currencies, including Dash is a good one. There's Litecoin, that's been out there. Ethereum is out there. These are all traded on the open market. People looking to get involved in cryptocurrency, get involved now. Go get a wallet. Go get a Coinbase account. Go to activistpost.com/Bitcoin. And that's...
Grab your guide.
Grab your guide to Bitcoin, which also will tell you how to go and get a Coinbase account. Coinbase has not reported their stuff to the IRS, so that's very good. We're in support of them. That's another story that we are going to be following, I think, for a long time, because that one may go all the way up to the Supreme Court. But the good part about this whole thing is Here is this maybe first example of a global banking, decentralized, not central banking,
Yeah.
coming across a technical hurdle, coming across a real issue, coming across an existential threat to the network. It's going to be interesting to watch. Can people just figure it out on their own? Because you know what? If we can solve what is essentially a banking crisis, we can damn sure solve just about anything else. Right?
Love it.
This is a great chance. It's a great opportunity. And it's also a great example of the free market, because if Bitcoin does slow down, it's going to open it up for other cryptocurrencies. And maybe Bitcoin is the reserve currency of the world. And then each country or each city or whatever, they have their own little cryptocurrency. So there's a lot of different, and it's not just cryptocurrencies, because the thing is, the blockchain is a record of transactions.
Yeah.
What we haven't even started seeing, which is really interesting, is you can store medical records on the blockchain.
Wow.
Imagine you could store
Yeah, that's
every
cool.
doctor's because it's a chain of events, right?
Yeah.
Your medical records. You could store school records on a blockchain. Your grades, the classes that you've taken at university. You could store reputation on the blockchain, right? Like an Uber driver or an
Or Yelp.
Airbnb host or Yelp. On a distributed ledger. And then, because it's being used and packed in, those little tokens could actually turn into money. So you could have a form of currency that was actually backed by people's medical records. Because the miners,
man.
you understand what I'm saying?
And I was just thinking about, I won't talk about it here, but the concept that you had.
Yes, indeed.
And
Yes,
that,
indeed.
Man.
So man, it's this thing is it is the future for sure. It's something that people need to be aware of. But the one thing that I will say to everybody out there is, go get a Bitcoin wallet now. Get involved in cryptocurrency now. Look, go spend $10, $20, $30. Learn about it, because this price is going up. I'm not speculating with it, but you can see that people find incredible amounts of value in it. It's not going away. And it is one of, when we started the show, I said I had 3 technologies for freedom. This is my number 1.
Yep.
My number 1. And you best believe that governments are paying attention. And so the more people have to be involved and paying attention and invested to prevent governments from doing the things that they're going to want. I don't know that they can control it, but we need to be invested and involved to stop governments from doing the things that they're gonna try to do with this whole thing. It's interesting times, man.
Yeah, very interesting.
Interesting times. Well, you know what? I think I'll say goodbye to the people.
All right.
Well, thank you for tuning in. It's good to be back in the States. And I want to thank our guest, Raeford Davis, for coming on. Look, we have a chance to build some bridges. We all want to be free. We all want to be free. Even the worst of us want their lives to be more comfortable and free from discomfort. It's very important, as we look out on the world, that we look out on the world with empathy, because what's happening in our political system, what's happening in our judicial system, in our criminal justice system, is a lot of division. We need to neither be the aggressors nor the victims, because in being the aggressor, we make ourselves the victim. And as we're seeing in the case of social justice, by claiming victimhood, we necessarily make ourselves the aggressor by forcing aggressive actions against other people, by forcing violent coercion against our neighbors. Instead, now is the time as individuals to empower ourselves with knowledge, with technology, with coming together with other individuals who are interested in making the world more free. And of course, you can do that by watching shows like ours. And you can come back and watch our show next Monday at 10 a.m. Also, please go and check out our content partner, Activist Post, at activistpost.com, and our brand new product, the Counter Markets newsletter. That's at countermarkets.com. Sign up and you will get your first issue free, your first month free. So, we'll see you next week. And until then, stay free.